And the audience, in the audience, you have probably noticed that we are covering all the elementary particles that have been used to build the universe in this session. And the next particle is protons. Is proton, and we are hearing a lecture from Professor Kai Grau from the Danish Center for Particle Therapy. Please.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to this meeting and present the current status of generating evidence, and maybe also the future of generating evidence for protons. Compared to BNCT, there are more experience. It's just another development in this very, very long history of technical developments in radiation oncology. This specialty has always been very much driven by technological developments, but I think the ion beam therapy, protons and other heavier particles, these are some of the largest constructions you have in healthcare. Maybe it is the most expensive piece of equipment in healthcare, with a price tag of maybe 100 million euros or more. So a lot of interest, of course, a lot of concerns also that these investments will not pay out in better outcomes, and actually not too much data. We'll come back to that. Yes, the accelerator used for proton therapy is definitely larger than the ones used for BNCT, and you can see here a typical outline of a facility, and if you look deep inside, I don't have a pointer, but you can imagine the patient lying there in the middle of the rotating gantry. So that means that you can see the walls are 4 meters thick concrete walls. So alone all the radiation protection means that this is a very, very heavy installation. The machines are heavy also and expensive. How does it work? Well, compared to radiotherapy, the physical advantage of proton is that this high energy particle, so the positive part of the protons, they will not interact with the tissue until they reach a specific depth that is depending on the energy of the beam. So it means that you can more or less treat the patient tumor in a specific depth, and definitely after that depth there will be no deposit of those. There is some deposit of those in the entrance. The red part is, if you compare to how radiotherapy interacts and works when we treat patients, you actually spare a lot of dose to the first part of the entrance, where the radiotherapy dose is mostly deposited, and definitely on the back side of the beam there is no dose. And for instance, you can see at the example at the bottom is a child being treated for medulloblastoma, where we treat the entire craniospinal axis. And this advantage that the proton beam stops completely means that we don't unnecessarily irradiate all the internal organs in such a child, and meaning that this child, who will survive for 70 or 80 years, will not develop new cancers due to this low-dose radiation that is otherwise given to the patient. So there are a lot of, you could say, medical applications of the advantageous dose distributions. And first of all, of course, to reduce the risk of serious complications when we treat tumors that are close to very sensitive organs, and that is especially the central nervous system. But also, more or less all indications where we treat children with radiotherapy, reducing the amount of unnecessary radiation to tissues outside of the treatment field gives a much better long-term outcome in terms of reducing secondary cancer and also some of the serious side effects. But of course, if this more gentle type of radiotherapy can be used and is working, then there is a potential that when maybe we can then also increase the dose to the target, to the tumor, and in turn get better outcome in terms of local tumor control and survival. It's not a new treatment. Sometimes we are invited to talk about this new development in radiotherapy. It's not a new development. It has been used since 1954. It was one of the spin-offs of the development of the nuclear bomb, and the scientists involved in that realized that some of the ions that were created could be used for medical good purposes. So the first patient was treated already in 1954. And by now, more than 300,000 patients have received particle therapy or ion beam therapy, mostly with protons. However, there is hardly any, what we would call high-level evidence that it really gives better outcome. You can imagine that it is definitely more expensive. But it's not so well proven. What are the indications where we are going to use it? Will this be a new treatment that, when it's completely rolled out, will completely replace all existing X-ray-based radiotherapy? Or will it continue to be for children and brain tumors and so on? Why are so few patients randomized or enrolled in randomized trials in this? And I think this is a very good example of what we call the catch-22 of expensive equipment, because you need the equipment to do the trials. The companies producing these types of machines, they are not responsible for generating the evidence. They are responsible for developing the equipment that is safe and delivers what they promise. But whether it works in the clinic, it's up to the professional community, up to us to demonstrate that it works. But when it's so, that normally works quite well for radiotherapy because the investments are reasonable. But for these very, very expensive treatments, I think most of the payers would like to see some evidence that it is worthwhile investing in this. So that's a vicious circle. You need the evidence, but you cannot generate the evidence without the machine. So that's the catch-22. And there's also another problem, and that's to the bottom, that even if we do the trials, some of the results may be outdated because it takes a long time to generate high-level evidence. So there are good explanations for why there are so few trials, but there's also some light at the end of the tunnel, and I will come back to that. So if you take a snapshot in 2017 and looked at what are the ongoing clinical trials at that point, you could see there was a few trials zooming into it here. Only 6 trials were comparing in a randomized setup the outcome of protons with X-ray-based radiotherapy. This list here is remarkable also because all of these trials were from the US. There were no European trials at that time. Some of these trials since 2017 have been completed. One of them was the phase 2 trial in esophageal cancer. And you can see in this setup, the radiochemotherapy was either proton, so IMPT, or photons, IMRT. And the red and green bars illustrate that there is much less toxicity in this type of treatment when the patients undergo chemoradiotherapy and followed by surgery, both in the total toxicity burden and also looking at the post-operative complications. So definitely a therapeutic advantage because the overall outcome in terms of local control and survival is, as you can see in the survival curves, were the same as we would expect because the dose given to the target, the tumor, is the same. So it should be the same also. The main reason for doing these types of studies is to show that proton therapy can reduce complications. The other American study that was on the list was the American randomized head and neck cancer trial just presented at ASCO, showing again that in this setup where patients were randomized between photons and protons. The outcome in terms of overall survival and disease-free survival was the same. There was no difference, but there was a significant reduction in the use of tube feeding and severe weight loss. There is, however, a problem with both of these trials is what we can call the insurance bias, which is a very, very large problem in American trials, and especially this type of trial, where about 1/3 of the patients randomized to to the standard treatment, IMRT, when they discovered that they were able to get proton therapy by their insurance company, they said, well, I don't want to have this standard treatment, I want the new one. So they actually crossed over to protons. And about 1/6 of the patients randomized to protons were denied protons by their insurance company. So they were not getting the treatment reimbursed, and they could not give it. So they were crossing over to the standard treatment. And that's a problem every time we see American studies in this type of expensive, in this field here, that the insurance bias means that you cannot use the standard intention to treat analysis, because 1/3 of the patients will actually not have received the intention to treat arm. Anyhow, we can do it better in Europe. And I think now we see your proton therapy has become a reality in Europe. In 2017, we had very few. We had 15 operational facilities, but a lot of things happened over the after 2017. So from 17 to 20, the number of operational facilities doubled. So we had large facilities in Denmark, UK, the Netherlands, and other places opening. Also facilities that are involved in generating evidence. So that's why I mean that we are now trying to, or seeing some light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to breaking the vicious circle, because we have many trials. We are coordinating a lot of these clinical research activities in the European Particle Therapy Network. So we have a very strong network. It's a very good size of a network. You have 30 or a little more than 30 centers, more or less at the same development stage also, with a lot of energy in building a new research infrastructure, setting up trials and so on. So we share a lot of common goals and problems. And if we look at the situation, so this is the European table of ongoing clinical trials in Europe. There are 32 proton intervention trials recruiting in Europe. They are not all randomized, but I think 18 of them are randomized trials in different tumor sites. Of course, you cannot read them. It's not the intention. I think it's just to show that there is definitely evidence being produced at the moment in Europe. Of course, I'm proud that 1/3 of these trials are from Denmark, where we at the Danish Center for Particle Therapy have 11 trials. 6 of them are randomized, covering more or less all tumor sites in the body where we use radiotherapy. Some of them, or several of them, are for recurrent re-irradiation, a little bit like we saw for BNCT. A good indication for a very localized treatment is patients who have already received radiotherapy once, but also in the primary setting for head and neck, breast, prostate, and other disease types. In Denmark, we have what we call the Danish model for collaboration. I think one of the explanations why we are able to set up these clinical trials is, of course, that we have the capacity at the Danish Center with 3 treatment rooms, but we also have a very strong collaboration in Denmark with our Danish multidisciplinary cancer groups, playing a very, very significant role in developing clinical guidelines and quality assurance and databases, but also doing clinical trials. Then we have our referring centers or collaborators at the existing oncology departments, radiation oncology departments. And then, of course, the DCPT, the Danish Center for Particle Therapy, is responsible for doing the proton therapy and trial support, whereas the diagnosis of and the multidisciplinary team decisions are made locally, and also the follow-up is made locally. This overlapping circle means that people are, we have, at the Danish Center, we have staff that are otherwise employed at other institutions. We have people that are involved in the multidisciplinary cancer groups and so on. And it's a very good interactive model, I think. We have been treating patients for 5 years now, and 1,000 patients, and almost 700 of them were included in clinical trials. So it means that about 70% of our patients are in trials, which were close to the aim that we have to have 80% of patients in clinical trials. So it's also underpinning that this is, the main activity at the Danish Center is to do clinical trials. An example of one of the trials is the DAHANKA 35 trial, a large randomized trial, where we have 170 patients so far randomized, so we are about halfway through, where we compare photons and protons. Compared to the US trials that was just published, the big difference is here that we select patients based on comparative dose planning. So we do a photon dose plan and a proton dose plan, and only the ones where there is a likelihood that the protons will reduce the dose to the organs at risk, we invite them into the trial and ask them to be randomized. So it's in a way we're using the comparative dose planning as a biomarker for only patients where there is a chance that proton therapy will be better being randomized. We look forward to seeing the result of that in a few years. We also have another ongoing trial, which I highlight here because of the European perspective. It's a European-supported, EU-supported, and also supported by the companies, randomized trial of protons versus photons in radiochemotherapy of esophageal cancer. And that's exactly where we see the benefit of having a network also like you have in OECI, but we have it between the proton centers, so we can do these multi-center international trials because we know each other well and we trust each other and we know who to contact and so on. It's really valuable to have this type of networking. So if we look at the indications for proton therapy, of course today is as we see it, but we have some standard indications. The ongoing trials are typically in all the other situations where radiotherapy leads to significant morbidity. That's where the trials are ongoing. The future trials, well, I don't think we will see trials in the future either for central nervous system, not to a great extent at least. We have some ongoing trials for gliomas, and we will also see a few trials in glioblastoma. But no trials where the question is protons versus photons for the children. That will not happen. But here we need a prospective data registry so that we can collect all the experience from these standard indications in Europe. And we are currently working with the European Particle Therapy Network to have funding for a European data registry for this type of phase 4 real-world data in all the indications for proton therapy that is not part of clinical trials. If we look at future trials, next generation trials, now we of course are awaiting the results of the already 30 trials ongoing. But I think, and I can see in the new trials developing and emerging, that we will now start looking at how we can use proton therapy to increase the local regional tumor control by increasing the dose or the dose per fraction, reducing the number of fractions and increasing the intensity, and combination of proton therapy with immunotherapy and new chemo drug and so on. So shifting away from having low reduction of morbidity as the primary endpoint to improvement in overall survival, and that's also, it's more appealing also for the patients to enter that type of trial. So I think we can use the experience from our existing trials, and we will actually have an easier way when we are going to do the next generation trials. So I think the future is bright. So in conclusion, I think we can say, with a few exceptions maybe, that today the role of proton therapy, when we look at all the indications for radiotherapy, is still unsettled. We don't know if it's going to replace IMRT or radiotherapy in head and neck and breast and all the other major indications. That will be more or less decided in the next decade. But it's definitely encouraging, and feels much better also to stand here and talk to you, and knowing that we have the trials ongoing. We are not, having no trials or nothing happening. It's actually a lot of things happening, and of course we hope that the majority of these trials will be completed, and we look forward to results. Not all of them will be positive, but we will get a much better picture of for whom and for how many are proton therapy becoming a new standard. And that type of information is eagerly awaited. Now the theme also of this conference is inequalities. And today there are a huge inequality in the access to proton therapy. There are many countries with no proton therapy facility at all, and other countries with a lot of proton centers. And I think we need that type of evidence to understand what are the basic requirements for coverage in access. In the future, we will also see protons being used to improve local regional control and survival, and look forward to that, of course. And that will definitely be defining the future of protons in the future. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Kai. Any questions from the audience?
Thank you, Tomas Kazda-Brno. My question is related to skin toxicity. Is it possible to go back to the second slide on your presentation, please? I recognize that in some patients there is higher skin toxicity, and it was understood to see the figure showing the photon beam therapy comparing to proton beam, where much higher dose on the skin surface was displayed for photon beam therapy.
No, but that's great. I cannot display the figure again, but it's correct that for the first 5 millimeters or so of when you have a spread out back peak or a use protons, especially if you only use one field, then the dose at the skin surface will be higher than what we see with high energy photons. That's something that we need to take into consideration when we plan the treatments and use multiple fields, so that we can reduce the dose to the skin. So it was one of the learning things, I think maybe 10, 15 years ago, that this was a new, you could say, a little bit recurring to the old photons days, that we had to be worried about skin toxicity because that type of complications were otherwise disappearing from radiotherapy. But for protons, we have to take it into consideration again. But it can be done.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for a great presentation. And as you know, we in Norway, we are very much looking to what you and your team has been doing in Denmark. I was wondering, from a patient perspective, do you receive, like when patients read about this new treatment and it's give better quality of life with the same results, do you receive many requests from Danish cancer patients that would like to to come to your location and get this treatment, and how do you sort of handle those requests from patients?
It's a good question, and it was also a big concern when we started that we would, you could say, oversell, the potential benefits when we described, the activities at the center. It's not something that we hear today that this is a big problem at the referring centers. We get patients phoning us with, from both Denmark and outside Denmark that they would like to have this treatment, and then we have a discussion with them that if they are eligible for one of the trials, they can receive protons. But in general, we actually don't know if it's a better treatment. So that we have to balance the information, and definitely not. It's very, very tempting when you have such a new facility and a new tool to say that this is now the cure for cancer, and also the media would like that type of headlines. But when we started, we were very concerned that we are not going to say that this is a magic bullet or anything. But we need to understand who is it a good treatment option for, and to do that we need you to enter into the trials.
Okay, Johanna.
So, thank you, Kai, for a very nice talk. And my first comment is related to the registry. I think it's a very, very fantastic idea. So, what are your concrete next steps? Where will it be located?
We don't know where it will be located, but we are currently working on an application to the EU, focusing in this round mostly for children. There is already a registry for children, but the next population would be about the adolescents and young adults. So that will be part of our application to the Pianoforte Consortium. Hopefully we can get funding there. The industry is interested in supporting it with IT infrastructure, but so far it's not been decided exactly when to start and where to have it.
Thanks. And then another question. So can you estimate what proportion of foreign patients have been treated in your very comprehensive trial program?
I think that varies from country to country, and at least 10, 15 years ago, when only few centers were receiving patients from, that would be PSI and Essen, and also Scandion, when it opened here in Sweden, received patients from neighboring countries, especially the children. And for us, we are allowed to treat patients from within the European Union. We get referrals outside the European Union, but very rarely. We have an agreement with Norway to treat at least some of the Norwegian children and grown-ups. But it's not a very big proportion. It's less than 5%, maybe even fewer of our referrals.
Thanks.
As a last question, I'm asking that because many innovations in radiation therapy during, let's say, 2-3 decades have been taken into clinical use with quite little evidence, actually, because they have been cheaper. So if the proton equipment were much cheaper than what it is now, would everything have been much more simple?
It would be, of course, easier to do larger studies and trials because it would be more generally accessible and easier for patients to say yes to enter into the trials. I think for the field, it is, in a way, it's a benefit that we need to do the trials in order to get the future investments, because otherwise we will end up in, for instance, IMRT, when the standard type of radiotherapy we use today. I think there are 2 or 3 smaller randomized trials actually showing that it works. We very, 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 very rapidly stop concerning about generating evidence for our equipment. As soon as we have it in-house, we just start using it. That's not good for the specialty of radiation oncology, that we actually have very little phase 3 trials. We can also go to our European or international conferences and go to the highlight sessions to see randomized trials, but there are hardly any randomized trials in radiotherapy in general. I hope proton therapy, with all our trials, we can set a new standard there.
But nobody has performed a trial if the surgery should be performed with a sharp knife or blunt knife.
No, that's exactly, but that's also the example we use to say that we're a little bit better than the surgeons in that sense. No offense.
Okay, thank you, Kai.
Welcome.